Hi, and thanks for joining us today. I'm George Pino, the CEO of Commercial Brokers International. I got a really exciting guest today that you're all going to want to listen to. More importantly, there's a lot of collateral material that I think you can get, and I would actually highly advise that. I loved his book. I ordered off Amazon, and we'll have all those links for you as well. And this is, of course, I'm talking about Steve Rozenberg. Now, Steve Rozenberg is an esteemed international. He started an esteemed international consulting firm. He's a keynote speaker, puts on many workshops for investors, both new and experienced, has one of the larger property management firms as well in Houston. So he's really has his finger on the pulse of what's going on today when it comes to commercial real estate. In addition to that, he is, as I mentioned, a published author. He is also an airline pilot. So juggling two careers at one time, that's personally, I think airline pilot might be more of a passion than work. My son's also an airline pilot. And one of the things I've always said is, if you follow your passion, you're not really working a day in your life if you do that for your job. And he's wanted to be a pilot since he was 10. And I'm sure that probably falls all along very similar lines for yourself. And then the last thing I do want to mention is the philanthropic approach with Steve. Recently, a few years back, due to a family tragedy, he did start a Live Like Jet scholarship fund. I highly, it's great scholarship fund, anything to promote education and things like that. We're going to have backlinks to all of that so that you can go in, you can donate if you'd like, you can be everything involved. So, Steve, quick question for you. And we're going to start off with one of the easiest ones. When exactly, you and I are probably about the same age. We're not necessarily spring chickens, but when did you start investing in real estate, and what made you actually want to get into real estate?
Yeah, it's a great question. And first of all, thanks for having me on, George. Appreciate it. So my want became a need the day that I got furloughed after 9/11 from the airlines. So I born and raised in Southern California. My parents were blue collar workers, 5 siblings. And I was told basically, hey, if you want something, you've got to go work for it and you've got to go get it. No one's going to give you anything in life. And that's what my parents taught us. And so we did. And I wanted to do one thing as a little kid, and that was be an airline pilot. I studied, I trained, I worked. And at 25 years old, I became the second youngest person hired by Continental Airlines. Best job in the world.
Just dated yourself.
I know. So best job in the world, flying. I was based in Guam, flying all over the South Pacific, Asia, Australia, Micronesian Islands. And it was the best job until a certain day in history. And again, that day was 9/11.
Yeah.
And I had to learn that a safe, secure job is not safe, and it was never secure. So when I didn't know what to do, because I used my parents' advice of focusing on one thing, of being a pilot, which was no longer wanted or needed by anybody. I was on the street with about 50,000 other pilots. I started to try to think, what do people do that are successful? At the time, Facebook didn't exist. YouTube didn't exist. The only thing that existed was a building with books called a library. So I went to the library, I got a library card, and I started reading a book a week on wealth. And everything seemed to tie back to real estate. And I knew nothing about it, but I thought, okay, obviously there is a common thread here with success and people owning some form of real estate. So I figured, okay, when I wanted to be a pilot, I had to learn how to fly with a flight instructor. So I looked around for a real estate mentor. I found one, I hired him, and that kind of got me into it. And it wasn't, many people get into real estate because they want to. I got into it because I had to. I had no choice because I had to figure out what I was going to do to pay my bills. So again, it's something that I thought one day, that was one of those one day, someday calendar things, became front and center. I have to learn this now. And so that's what got me thrusted into the real estate world.
That must have been a hell of a learning curve. And also to generate income right away when you need it. That's something very difficult to do. It's almost kind of like a little magic potion that I'm sure a lot of your readers and viewers would want to know as well. But, it definitely had to be a hell of a learning curve for you.
It was, if you want to relate it to vertical, that's about what I would say. And listen, the one thing I learned is, not everybody wants to see you succeed, even if they take your money. And I've learned that there's a different set of rules for different businesses that you're in.
Mhm.
And so the quote unquote real estate professional is not necessarily a professional where I would say an airline professional. And, listen, I
Mhm.
got the school of hard knocks. I got ripped off. I got lied to. I got
Yeah.
cheated, stolen from, you name it. But I kept getting back up. Every
Mhm.
single time I got back up because I didn't have a choice. I had to figure this out. And, I lost a lot of money. I had a lot of sleepless nights wondering, am I doing the right thing? Is this the stupidest thing I've ever done? I could have gone over to Korea or South America and flown for pennies on the dollar being a pilot. But I thought to myself, you know what? No, I am not going to let another business dictate my life or my future again. I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to make this work. And that was kind of like swimming in the deep end of a dark pool. That was me. I was not going to go back to the safety of the sides. I was going to stay there until I figured it out. And listen, I did. I made a lot of failures. I made a lot of mistakes, but I figured it out.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer that I'm the first person to admit that I fail often as well. Because I'm a firm believer that the only way that you know that you're really pushing yourself and pushing that envelope is by failure. And it's not about it's not about the fact that you failed. It's about how do you handle that failure? What did you learn from it? And what are you going to do with it? Which I think ties really closely into your book, which is, I love the title of it, Building an Empire, Failing Our Way to Millions.
Yeah.
So, if you could just touch base a little bit, kind of the synopsis, a little bit of what you're kind of talking about. I know I kind of threw a very high level of it,
No, it's
but
fine. It's funny when
yeah,
I talked to a lot of people that read my book and they're like, man, that was my story. That was
yeah,
that was me.
it,
And yeah, exactly. And
yeah,
what I've learned is now that I do a lot of speaking and I coach and mentor a lot of people, thousands of people I get the opportunity to work with. And the one thing I'll say, the common thread I think is what it is. It's not what happened to me. It's the fact that it's one issue or challenge. Once we solve that, there's another one waiting behind it and another one and another one. And the bigger the business, bigger the zeros, the challenges and issues get bigger. And what I've learned is that's the business we're in as entrepreneurs. We are in the solution business. Many entrepreneurs, real estate investors, whatever you want to call us, some people naively think, oh, once I get past this, I'm good. And I'm like, do you really think there's not another problem behind that one that you have to solve? Like, that's what we do. That's why we make the money we make and we have the lifestyle we have, is because we are solutions people.
mm,
And if you look at everything as a problem, it's a problem. If I look
mm,
at everything as, hey, that's a next solution I can solve, it's kind of like opening the loop. It's opening the circle. So my book is relatable to a lot of people. Why? Because it's a real life, no shit, problem after problem after problem. Or the way I looked at it is I just got to come up with a better solution. And
yeah.
listen, the bigger the businesses, the bigger the solutions have to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of I do a lot of training for real commercial real estate agents. And I always tell them that, don't be afraid to fail. Don't be, just get out there, you find out. But really, when you're talking to your clients, you're not selling anything, nor will you ever sell anything to them. What you're doing is addressing their pain points and helping them find a solution to those pain points. And that will get you a career versus a transactional chasing deals left and right, and some are going to fail, some aren't, whatever. So instead, build a career upon it by actually looking at solutions. And I think ultimately, if they approach it that way, most people approach it that way, then they will eventually, or they will be successful, because they're looking not so much of this is going to happen, because the fact is life goes on, things happen, but it's how you react to it and really adjust your performance. And which is what I loved about, that was my takeaway. And it was adjusting, learning, going, and really perspective. Part of it, perspective being, did I fail or did I learn something? If I learned something, I
Yeah.
didn't really fail.
And listen, you were in the military, me being an airline pilot.
Yeah.
All we're doing is training all the time
Yeah.
for that what if, for the challenge to come up. When I'm going down the runway and I fly a Boeing 777, 350
Mm-hmm.
people, 700,000 pound takeoff weight,
Mm-hmm.
and we lose an engine on rotation, you're not sitting there in the back going, I wonder if this guy knows what he's doing. You're going,
Yeah.
this guy knows what he's doing and he's going to save my life. Why? Because
Yeah.
we practice and we train for it. We are constantly looking for solutions. So when I was building my business, just like in the military, you train, you train, you train for that one day when it does happen. When we do lose an engine, we know what to do. And so the challenge is I think many entrepreneurs, they just hope and pray it never happens. Successful people train and prepare for it. And I think that's a big difference. It doesn't matter, right? Real estate, we can label it whatever we want. But when we lose our proverbial engine in our business, have we been training and prepping for it? Or were we just hoping and praying it never happened?
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. I mean, a lot of what we look at when we're looking at, how we're going to pick up, how we're going to go, how we're going to move forward. It is a lot of that is the training with, when we look at an investment property, one of the first things I say, whether it's for myself or with investors, or if I'm representing a client, is I'm looking at the exit strategy, because I honestly, I don't care how great it looks today. If I'm buying it for 10, 7, 10, 5, 7, 10-year hold, I better know what it's going to expect, what it's going to look like. What happens, there's no company out there that's too big to fail. So what happens if that tenant goes out of business? Who am I going to re-tenant it with? How am I going to reposition it with? So I'm looking at those contingencies all the way throughout, as opposed to, let's just collect the rent, and then when it becomes vacant, I'll figure it out then. So I completely agree that if, you train for it and you have a plan of action, which kind of goes into a little bit of where, when you identify challenges that you need to address, some of those are immediate, short term, some of them are medium term, some may be long term, such as repositioning an asset down the road 10 years from now. How do you go about that when you're in your investment strategy? Do you triage that and say, you know what, even though this is medium term, I need to address this today because I got a time frame for this, or, how are you looking at that? How are you?
Yeah. And that's a great question. I don't think anyone's really asked me that before. It's a great question. Is, as an airline pilot, we'll say, I've been flying Boeings for 27 years. And I've been working, with Continental/United. They've invested millions of dollars in me to make sure that this $250 million aircraft, does not become a statistic when an emergency happens. And so the way that I built my property management company is we built it basically with the same ideology as how airlines run. Okay. Processes, procedures, structure, checklists, emergencies. So I think to myself, okay, if that's the way I run my business, and it works with a $250 million airplane, couldn't it work in any business model that we inject into it? So we are taught there's 4 things that we are taught whenever there is an emergency. And so if we follow those 4 things, which is what I teach people, if we follow those 4 things in any emergency, I don't care what it is. If we follow those, the odds of us having a good outcome are slim to none. Now, from a very high level, 10,000 foot view, I would say, is it on fire? Is it on fire? Is the ship sinking? Or are we going to pick at that scab to make it bleed, so to speak? I want to know, is it okay as is? So when I look at a business, there's 5 pieces of a business. And again, when I say real estate, that is a business, right? You have income, expenses. So when I say business, I'm talking real estate investors as well. So we've got marketing, sales, operations, accounting, and leadership. There's 5 fundamental foundations to a business. If you look at the law of advancement says before you go up, you have to go down. So in this case of real estate, before we can build the structure, we have to build the foundation. You would never build an apartment complex and go oh, fuck, we forgot the foundation. Oh my God, we wouldn't do that, right? We would always build the foundation, and based on the footprint of the foundation and the depth would be the size of the structure. So, and I'm getting somewhere with the story. So if we build the structure based on the foundation, and you and I walked up and we said, there's no left side of this foundation. There's no marketing or sales here. So the odds of this thing starting to lean and list in bad economic conditions, it's obvious. If this was a house, we would be clear. So when I look at a deal, real estate, business, whatever they're doing, I'm looking at the 5 foundations. Do we have marketing? Do we have sales? Do we have operations? Do we have accounting? Do we have leadership? If it's a very clear, if they can't say yes and it's documented, the answer is no. It's not a maybe. It's a yes or a no. Yeah. I can see what's on fire. So based on that, I could see where the challenge is. Now, what someone may call an emergency and what I may call an emergency may be 2 different perspectives, because as you know, many people react emotionally in a business situation, which is not how you handle emergencies. I tell people, a vendor not paying you, you may call an emergency, and maybe losing half of your revenue because of it, because of a pissed off client. Maybe that's an emergency. Losing an engine at 35,000 feet over the Pacific coming back from Australia at, with 300 people on board is a little bit more of an emergency than what you just described. But I bet you the outcome that we would handle the emergency with what we're trained is completely different than the outcome of how somebody handles their quote unquote emergency. And I'm not belittling anyone's emergency, but if they followed the 4 things that we're taught, they'd probably have a better outcome. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I think there's a lot to be said about, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. If it works there, I just pulled it over into my arena of real estate and said, what if this would work here? What if checklist, procedures, structures would work here? And that's how we grew our company and dealt with emergencies and issues and drama and all the other BS.
So really what I'm taking back from this is to have a plan of action.
Absolutely.
And live by it, but also be able to execute it, understand when you're going to execute it, how you're going to execute it, and what you're going to do if it doesn't execute properly. Have a backup plan. The old saying, 1 is none, 2 is 1. So have that backup plan just in case, because you never know what may happen. And I can tell you that, when I first started off investing, I was luckily a snot-nosed kid at I think 28 years of age. Mine pretty much most
last year.
Life. Huh?
Last year.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. Sure. This was somewhere in the mid 80s, but yeah, mid-late 80s. But back then, like you said, there wasn't really the internet. I mean, I still remember to this day when somebody walked up to me and said, have you heard of this internet thing? It's going to be huge. And
sure. And we'll be buying water one day too, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they're going to pay $5 for coffee. What? No.
Yeah. And pay for the radio.
Exactly. So, I remember getting into it, but, growing up, my parents were always, save, save, save. They were of the one, my father was, he grew up during the Depression era. Everything was, what he used to say was, when we slaughtered a pig, we used everything but the squeal. And, they even used the bladder for a ball for the kids, the small kids, for a toy. And then my mom grew up in post-World War II Japan, having to go through the black market and things like that. So everything was all save, don't invest, keep your money. It's king. Cash is king. And I saw growing up how my father wanted to invest, but always afraid to take that step. And, even though I did my analysis on the first property that we bought, my business partner and I purchased, and we did pretty well with almost all of our investments. But I got to tell you, it was hard opening up that checkbook saying, I'm just, because it was so ingrained in me. But I also realized that if this is how I want to create generational wealth, there are more millionaires made via real estate than any other form or business medium in the United States. Over 57%, I believe, of the millionaires come from real estate. Yeah. So, it is a profound number. So when we look at it, I think that getting the investors, what helped me was kind of what you're saying, having that plan, knowing here's what I want. And, would you suggest to formalize that plan a little bit more, so maybe even having a business plan? I've heard some people write business plans for one property, each property, like, here's my business plan.
So, and again, I'm going to go back to, I use a lot of flying analogies because I'm not very smart and someone smarter than me has already created it. But I use the analogy, if we were going from Houston to Hawaii, right, we would start the flight in our heads from Hawaii and work it backwards. So we say, we're going to land at 8:50 a.m. in Hawaii. And we would say, okay, this is the routing we're going to go. This is how much fuel we need. These are the headings we're going to fly. This is where the weather is. This is how we're going to deviate. If we have to have an emergency, this is where we're going to dump into. So we walked through the flight, reverse engineering it from landing in Hawaii and reverse engineer backwards. That's called a flight plan. Like, you would never get on a flight with me. And if I said, hey, George, like, today we're going to go maybe Hawaii, maybe London. I've never been to any of them. I don't know how to get there. I don't even know how much fuel it takes. And I don't even know what it looks like, but I've got a good gut feeling. The odds of us making any of those destinations are slim to none. because we don't have a flight plan. There's nothing that signifies we're going to get there. How many people start a business without a business plan? They don't have a destination. They don't know how much capital they need. They don't know the routing. They don't know what to do in an emergency. They just have a good gut feeling. So that's why so many people in real estate and in business crash and burn, but so many flights don't. So it's just relatable to say, well, why wouldn't you? Like, for example, if we put our phone and we want directions from like Google Maps, we have to give it two things: where we are and where we're going.
Yep.
Like that's clear. Like, so if you said, hey, Steve, I need directions, the first thing I'm going to say is, where are you going? And if you're like, oh, I don't know, I just got a good gut feeling, I'm just busy, I'm going to go, well, then I can't help you.
Yeah.
But we start our real estate investing career, we start our business career going, I've got a good gut feeling, I'm just going to get out on the highway and go. And it's like, how do you even know you're going in the right direction for what you want in life or what your goals are? And so that's the challenge many people have, is they never think about that part of it. And I get it. I was that person, but that's what's called motivation. Motivation dies over time. It's your why that keeps you moving. And so my point is I think absolutely, listen, you could get sued for $1 million just as easily with one single family home as you can lose $10 million in a syndication fund apartment complex. And the only difference is preparation. You've got to train and prepare. Part of that is a business plan.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I everything that you're saying also goes into, we have a lot of viewers that are also real estate agents, commercial real estate agents around the country. And I think this goes in for any new agents also coming
100%.
in. You know, I always tell agents in my training classes that if a client can't really indicate to you what their objectives and goals are for their property or a property they want to acquire, they just don't know, and they're probably not that serious.
Exactly.
It's the best is, I want to, what type of property are you looking for? I want a deal. Like, okay, well, a deal to me is different than a deal to you, is different from a deal to Steve.
100%.
So why don't you tell me some key metrics you're looking for and how you're planning on holding it and this and that. So we delve into that. So I love that. Now, how about partnerships? I mean, would you advise possibly working with partners? What are the pitfalls and positives? Because I think the main positive with the partners, perhaps you, especially when you have another career that you're committed to as well and working, that you have another person that you can rely on as well should things happen, especially if you're doing your own management or things along those lines. But at the same time, you know, as was explained to me, and this is coming from someone who's had a business partner since 1993, as was explained to me, if you're not going to do the work of three people as a partnership, at least three people, then don't partner, because you sure as hell don't want the headaches of a relationship that's ongoing. So that's how we've always looked at it, and it's worked pretty well for us. We're very segregated into what we do. We know what our specialties are and what we how to handle that. But someone starting new, bringing in a partner, I mean, it may be a little outweighed on who has more education, or both of you may not have. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. And it's one that's often overlooked because everyone looks at the pie in the sky. Hey, we're both trying to do something. This guy has the money. I've got the sweat equity. So we're going to go in halves, right? So the first thing is you've got to clearly identify, what is the goal of doing this? Again, what is the destination of this venture? How do we clearly identify that we've reached it? What is my role? What is your role? So what is it that I'm doing? Again, if we go back to the foundation, there's 5 roles. Who's doing which one of those? And are there any roles that are overlapping, which they shouldn't, or are we missing any of those 5 roles? So once we identify the roles, okay, what is your time commitment? What is his time commitment? What is your capital injection going to be? If there needs to be a cash infusion, who's doing that? What is your exit strategy? What is your exit strategy? So I do these conversations with business partners, and I call it an alignment meeting. You've got to align. So are we even aligned with where we're going? The biggest thing most people never ask or put in paper, as I'm sure you're familiar with, what if we get a divorce? Yeah. What if this just doesn't work and we have assets now that we have to part ways with? Oh, we've been friends since elementary school. That'll never happen. That is exactly why you have to do this. If you can't have this conversation in calm waters, do you think when the shit's hitting the fan and there's money involved and money on the table, it's going to get better or worse? And so that's how the dissolution, how do we dissolve this and still be amicable to each other? And
Yeah, I agree
right?
100% on that. I mean, it's funny because for the first 20 years of our partnership, well, maybe not 20, about 17 years, we didn't have an agreement. It was a
Mhm.
handshake because we were both brought up as your
Good as
word
your word.
is your word, and you can spend your entire life building your reputation, but it takes one screw up and a ethics issue to ruin it for life. So we're always, for us, it's like if I say something, I'm going to live by it. And the pro tip for everybody, because at first when the attorneys approached us and said, "You guys don't have buy sell agreements, you don't have the partner, this and that," and I'm like, "No, we've been," and it's like, okay, but what happens if you die? Now it's your wife doing
Yep.
this, or children, or someone else. Or what happens if something happens tragic in your life and you need to tap into it and your partner doesn't want to? So pro tip, always put in nowadays a buy sell agreement. I probably get
Yep.
a half dozen calls a year from potential clients looking to sell off assets where they're in a partnership and don't know what to do. And they ultimately have to go to a partition action, which will take years. And really, the only people that win on a partition action are the attorneys.
Yeah.
But
You
so
know,
I see this all the time. So I think you're hitting the nail right on the head.
and one thing, George, a couple of things I'll say is one thing that me and my business partners, we had life insurance policies on each
Yep.
other.
Yep. Team
So that's one thing
insurance.
to
Absolutely.
that's one thing. The other thing is it's very, very important to make sure, as I know you know this, is you got to stay in your lane, right? Like I was the visionary, he was the integrator. I was in charge of sales and marketing, he was in charge of operations, accounting, and we both had our say in leadership. The one thing I will say, and this is where, ego gets in the way with a lot of people. It wasn't my business. It wasn't his business. We had our roles. The business has to be a self-sustaining operation. We just breathe life into the business as
Mhm.
our roles. But
Yep.
we always stay, I shouldn't say always. We tried our best to stay in our lanes, and we made it a point that we would never argue in front of the team. And
Yeah.
we had a pretty big team in our operations. It was like, hey, you know what? We need to have a solid front, because if they see that fracture,
Mhm.
that sends shockwaves like you don't believe. So
Oh, absolutely.
one thing I recommend with people that I coach is let's say you and your business partner, I recommend doing monthly or quarterly board of directors meetings and
Mhm.
having your spouses or significant other involved in the meetings,
Mhm.
because that's the high level. Like if we're on the T-Mobile board, I don't need to work for T-Mobile to be on the board. This is when
Yeah.
you go over the P&L, the financial forecast, the balance sheets, the goals for the year, the 90-day goals. Are we on track or off track? Bring the spouses in to ask the questions. So whenever there's chatter going on during the month, it's like, you know what? Let's save it for the board of directors meeting. We can
Mhm.
discuss it then.
Yep.
And that's the meeting that you never bring a laptop to. It's very high level. And if you want to get some data, hey, I will get this information and I will report it at the next board of directors. But what it
Mhm.
does is it brings the spouses and the partners, everyone to align, so that if there is a challenge, it's discussed there at a very high level, not, hey, my wife's getting pissed because I'm spending a lot of time in the company. Let's discuss it here. Let's come up with a plan of action and let's work the action. Instead of it being reactive, we start
Mhm.
being proactive in our business and we start actually getting results as opposed to those fractures. Because I say the spouses don't need to be involved in the business, but they need to be aware if they are a stakeholder and they can benefit
Mhm.
or can suffer as a result of decisions you guys make. I think it's financially responsible for them to be involved, at least in the upper level board meetings.
Yep. I love that response. And actually, that's one of the first times anyone's ever said anything like that to me too. And I love that. I love the look and the perception, but also um the fact that the transparency of it all as well. I can see the benefits for both sides having that involved. And so I love that. So, we've talked a little, just scratch the surface a little bit about your book and in the conversation itself. But the book again is Building an Empire, Failing Our Way to Millions. You can search it on Amazon, Steve Rozenberg with a Z, and you'll be able to find it. And but I want to ask you a quick question, because we talked about how the book is about learning from your mistakes and challenges and how to overcome them. What's one of the simplest yet hardest to implement challenges that you had to overcome?
Thinking too small. To be completely honest, I
Yeah.
think that one of the challenges, and I learned very quickly to start thinking bigger. As we were growing our business, we ended up, and it doesn't say it in the book, but we ended up selling and exiting to venture capital. But before we did this, we were actually looking to franchise it, not only in the United States, but in Australia and Malaysia. So we were swinging for fences on this. And so we started getting, we were mentored and we were coached, and we started realizing if we want to play this game, we're in the game anyways. Why not swing for the fences, basically? And so I think we should have gone bigger faster and been okay making the mistakes, because we related our success or our failures based on our revenue or our profit. And that's just that is a metric, but that's not the only metric to measuring success.
Sure.
And again, depending on the goal, depending on the game we're playing, but I realize there's other games out there inside of our game with different sets of rules. And so what I've learned is when I talk to people that are much more successful than me, the only thing that I learned was the velocity of money, doing it faster, doing it quicker so that I could fail faster to get back up and do it again, fail faster. And the velocity of it, I wish I would have done it faster and quicker, because I think my success would have been more.
Now, in all fairness, though, do you think that the speed that you react now today is based up a lot upon your experience, which is what was probably limiting in the early side? Not trying to rationalize it, but
no, yeah, 100%. I think the speed. Listen, and I remember my business partner told me that, or our business coach, and he probably got it from somewhere else, I'm sure. But it's like, business doesn't get easier; you have to get better.
Yeah.
And the bigger the zeros of revenue, it doesn't get easier. You have to think faster. And so, when you're dealing with a $50,000 business as opposed to a 5 million or 50 million, and I've coached all different kinds, the challenge is the speed at which the person reacts and how big they think, because you can't go from 5 million to 50 million and work that much harder. So you've got to ask yourself, what is it that someone that's doing 5 million as opposed to 50 million, what is it they're doing differently? Well, it's obviously how they're thinking. It's not what they're doing. It's who they've become. And so you have to become a different person. So what I've learned is, many times in school, we're taught to be good employees. We're taught to work hard, and doing and working is the one lever that we always pull. We always pull that lever. But successful people, when I say successful, I'm talking 9, 10-figure business owners who I'm friends with. They say, that's not the lever we pull. We pull the other lever. And I'm like, what's the other lever? It's who we have to be. And we have to be $50 million CEOs. We have to think like it, walk like it, talk like it, act like it. It's not what we do. It's who we become. And so I've learned that people that are playing the do hit lever and they're pulling that wrong lever, if you want a different result, you've got to change your action. If you want a different output, you got to change your input. So doing the same thing over and over again is like, and expecting a different result is insanity. So what I've learned is there's another lever. And I never knew about that lever as an employee working for an airline, being an employee, trying to think, if I just work harder, because that's what my parents taught me. But I think that that's an old analogy that doesn't work in today's society if you want to accelerate the velocity of your returns.
Someone said this to me the other day, and I think it's very apropos, especially when you look at it outside the box, not just a straightforward. It's an old saying, and I use a lot of analogies and sayings as well, because my memory is not so good, and it's the easiest way to remember. And like you said, somebody else came up with it, so
exactly.
But to me, that's the epitome of where the clothes for the job you want, not the job you have. So
that is very true. I like that.
And it has nothing to do with the clothes. It has to do with the mindset. It's putting that, when you put those clothes on, it changes your mindset, so to speak. And I think that is a key factor in what you're saying there. So lastly, I know investors want to know from you specifically, trends right now. Where do you see the trends in real estate investing, in commercial real estate? I mean, we've heard a lot about the whole, lenders doing the extend and pretend, people waiting for the foreclosures, but they're not happening because the extensions and everything else, the workouts that they're doing. But there have been talks about earlier this year, multiple cuts in the interest rates. The newest news this year, today actually, the reports are not as good as expected. So we're likely not to get any kind of cut. If we do it, it'll probably be a politically driven one right prior to the election. A month or so is my guess. What do you see, and what are you forecasting? Where do you see maybe the opportunities, and where do you see, because obviously with confusion and disruption there's opportunity, but also where are the pitfalls that people should be looking out for?
Yeah, it's funny. I do get asked that question a lot, and I was on a board recently for Houston, Texas, for the real estate economy, and I equated to, as a kid, being down in Huntington Beach in Southern California, and there's some people that are trying to time the waves. All they're trying to do is time the waves, and they will stand there all day long trying to time this wave that is never going to be timed perfectly. And then you got the other guy that says, "Screw it, I'm just going out there and I'm just going to go through the wave," and it's never going to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And so it reminds me of that scenario, in the sense that there are people out there that are just trying their best to time this because they don't want to get wet. They don't want to get dirty. At some point, you got to get in the water, right? You're going to get wet. And you know what? You're going to fail. Now, if you've sharpened your mental axe and you are prepared and your ducks are in a row, and the lights go out in the economy, or whatever you want to call it, whatever your barometer, like you and I could look at this, right? And we can go, this is a great economy. John over there can go, oh man, this is the sky is falling. Mm-hmm. Same economy, but we have different perspectives, right? Yeah. Normally that is because people base a future decision on a past emotional experience. So based on 2007, if I became a multimillionaire as a result of 2007, buying a lot of products when everything was down, and you overpaid and lost everything, the next economic crash coming, you and I would have different perspectives as to how we're looking at this market coming based on a past emotional experience, which in business, that is not how you should do it. You should be looking at facts and figures, data and numbers.
Absolutely.
And so when I coach people, and again, I coach a lot of real estate investors, and they'll say like, oh, there's no deals. I'm like, okay, so in Houston, Texas, right now, there are no transactions happening at all. Everything is stopped. Is that what you're saying? Well, no, there's deals. Okay, so there's one deal, two deals? No, there's the same amount of deals. Okay, so deals are happening. So what people are doing is they are basing their business model on a tactic. A tactic is something that changes with time. Mm-hmm. It is very possible that many of the people that tell me there's no deals are using a tactic that maybe worked in COVID, maybe pre-COVID, maybe 2010. But that tactic doesn't work now. It's kind of like going to Lake Tahoe in the summertime trying to snow ski. Mm-hmm. Doesn't work. It's the right idea, wrong order, wrong tactic, right? So all of a sudden, you got to change your tactic. That's not going to come back around until the wintertime. Yep. So I think that, yes, are there going to be people hurt? Absolutely. In Houston, Texas, and I've been on I was just in Denver at another big real estate, Brandon Turner's event speaking. There's a lot of people that are hurting. There's a lot of people getting their asses handed to them. Why? Because they bought those properties with the wrong tactic. Now, if you're sitting there standing in the sidelines and you've got capital, you have a business plan, you have a vision, and you're ready to rock and roll, you're going to be able to capitalize on that. They say, when the tide goes out, you see who's not wearing clothes. I think we're going to see the tide go out, and we're going to see who did not have a business plan. And I think everyone's holding on. But to be honest with you, those are the people that are not taking action are the ones that will never take action. Yeah. I mean, as well as I do, everybody will have a reason why the temperature of the water is just not right. The waves are crashing correctly. There'll be the other guys that go, you know what, screw it. I'm going surfing, and I'm going to ride these waves, and not every wave is going to be perfect, but I'm going to ride it. Yep. And so I hate to answer it without an answer. I think the answer is there will be people that lose everything, and there will be multimillionaires created, probably more millionaires created in real estate in the next couple of years than in the past decade. Yeah. Because it'll stick, because they're actually buying them at the right price. Absolutely. And I think, and I know I've got some personal friends that are getting some loans called $50 million loans.
Oh yeah.
Why? Maybe they purchased it incorrectly. Maybe they're trying to time it and they never thought worst case scenario because they didn't have an emergency plan. I don't know. That's not for me to judge, but I do know some people that are really, really hurting. One man's trash is another man's treasure, and I think that if you are capitalized correctly, you have the liquidity, you have the you have the business flight plan, you're ready to rock and roll. I think you could capitalize on this and be very, very successful if you're prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and that goes back to, you know, since 2010, we saw a lot of people make a lot of money. We've had a very big upward growth, but I can tell you that the majority of the deals I saw from my own personal investment, when I'm looking at these investors make them, they weren't right for me because I have a completely different hold strategy. And then what they're doing, a lot of them were doing that 3 to 5 year syndication, flip it out. And that's great when things are going up and they're almost timing the market. You know, as you said, using your tide analogy, all boats also rise in an incoming tide. So it's easy to make
Absolutely.
money when the tide's rising and everyone's doing well. It's hard to make money when it starts going out because, like you said, that's when you see who's not wearing pants and what, you know, how can you take it, not advantage, but what are the opportunities then that opens up.
Capitalize
So
on it.
absolutely, absolutely. So, you know, I really appreciate your time, Steve, and I can keep going. And
Yeah.
you know, I think this is going to be a really good video. I'd love to continue like down the road, maybe with a second video sometime.
Sure.
Go a little bit more into it. And you know, for contact information, we're going to put the website and links over to everything that we discussed at the bottom of this video. So make sure that you do check it out. I think it is great to see. And again, thank you for tuning in. If you haven't done so already, please do subscribe. Not just to me, but check out Steve. He has a pretty good podcast too. All right. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you.